It's been said that every quilt tells a story, and it's so true. But I also believe every quilter has a story to tell. I wanted to hear about the people behind these wonderful quilts and thought you'd enjoy hearing about their lives also. Welcome to A Quilter's Life. How exciting for me for a quilter to sign up on my calendar without me contacting them first. Thank you, Mary Shepard, for sending Patricia Moller my way. What a blessing to hear Trisha's story. She calls herself a fourth-generation quilter, but the third generation was skipped. I agree with her that time flies when you're involved in what you love. Trisha hopes that you may find some inspiration from her work. Patricia, thanks so much for being on A Quilter's Life.
Thank you for having me.
We're kind of laughing here because I want to go back and forth between calling you Patricia and Trisha. So share with me why we're talking about that.
I do go by Trisha or Trish with my friends, but my dad called me Patricia. My dad named all of our siblings, and he loved the name Patricia. And so whenever I have an opportunity to use it, I use it in his honor because he loves the name so much.
It's a beautiful name.
Thank you.
Well, you said that some friends sent you to A Quilter's Life. Tell me who sent you.
It was Mary Shepard. I know Mary through the Modern Guild here in Delaware. We only have one Modern Guild. We're a small state. And Mary was president of our guild 2 years ago. She became president, I think, just after I joined when I moved here. And so I've gotten to know Mary through the guild. And of course, she's written her book. And she is in the middle of writing the next one, getting it done, which is really exciting for everyone here in Delaware. I know Mary also through our retreats. I am the retreat coordinator for the Modern Guild. And we go to Ocean City, Maryland every January for 4 days and seclude ourselves in a lovely Marriott at off-season prices. And we just sew to our heart's content, which is really fun. So that's how I've gotten to know Mary.
Oh, cool. I met her at QuiltCon. Were you there also?
I was not this year. I was supposed to go, but it turned out my granddaughter's due date was just a couple of days on either side of QuiltCon. And I didn't want to be in North Carolina when the baby was born. She's my first grandchild as well. So I said, you know what? I'm just going to pass. I was in Atlanta the year before. My son lives in Atlanta, so it was a very good deal.
Wow. Let's jump back. Share where you were born and raised.
I was born and raised in Delaware County, Pennsylvania, just outside of Philadelphia in a town called Upper Darby. I lived there till I went to grad school. And I went to Upper Darby High School. I graduated from Albright College in Reading, and then I went to Penn State for my master's. I actually have a degree in Spanish linguistics. So I taught Spanish for 25 years, on and off, between children and all the other things. So that's where I was born and raised. I'm a Pennsylvanian at heart and an Eagle fan and a Philly fan. And I'm married to a Giants fan, which is pretty terrible.
Share a special childhood memory.
I guess my most special childhood memory was probably with my grandparents. They lived in Western Pennsylvania in Altoona. And I used to go there every summer. My dad would take his vacation. We would spend a week at the shore, but we would always go and spend a week at my grandparents' house. And one summer I got to go there all by myself and spend the week. And so my grandmother was a seamstress. She was a teacher by trade in a one-room schoolhouse. Later on, during the Depression, she needed to make money when my grandfather was out of work with the railroad. So she was a tremendous seamstress and quilter as well. And so that summer, she tried to turn me into a seamstress. It didn't work. But I did get the quilting bug. So I figure I got that. But I just remember being in the kitchen with her and rolling pie dough and putting cinnamon and sugar and butter on it, and just spending that time with them and being alone there was really, really special.
That one-on-one time is so great. I bet you're excited to be able to do that with your granddaughter when she gets
I am. I can't wait. I can't wait to sit her on my lap in front of my sewing machine. Although my son is determined to turn her into a soccer player. So she can do both.
She can. Now, other than quilting, did you have employment?
Yes, I was a Spanish teacher at the high school level for 25 years, which was a great experience. I actually got to use my quilting time in there as well because we did wellness groups with the ninth graders, and I had them make a quilt based on the theme of the wellness that year. So some of those quilts hang in the cafeteria where I used to work, which is really fun. In addition to that, I ran a sewing club one year. Kids are fickle, so the next year they were off to the next activity, whatever it was, but it was wonderful. The kids learned a few things. One of them actually is a graphic designer now. She's an amazing artist and living in California. And she actually came to my house and did some sewing with me there as well. So that was really wonderful. And after I stopped teaching full time, I became a supervisor for language teachers at Marist College in New York. So I would go out and observe student teachers and help them on their way to get started. And now I work in a quilt store a couple days a week, and I've turned my quilting bug kind of into a little bit of an employment. And I also design patterns, started playing with my own pencil and pad, so to speak, and just trying to come up with ideas I love and try to market them locally. I'm not looking to be the next big quilt maker. I'm just looking to have fun.
I'm going to jump back to your Spanish teaching.
Mm-hmm.
Was it in college, high school, elementary school when it hit you? I want to be a teacher, or specifically, I want to teach Spanish.
I'm 11 years behind my siblings. I was a bit of a surprise, to say the least. And my sister took Spanish in high school. And I remember when I was little, must have been like a first grade party or a kindergarten party, she made a piñata for my party, which I thought was really cool. That's my first memory of Spanish. I had a friend whose family was from Spain, Marlena. And so I got to know her a little bit. So that might have had something to do with it. But I got to high school. I actually dropped Spanish my senior year because I said, I'm never going to use this. And I went to college as a pre-med major, actually, and nursing. And I realized that was not for me. So I was getting A's in Spanish, and my Spanish professor said, you really should be in the higher level class. And I said, no, I'm going to take my A. You know, I'm a science major. I just want to get out. And then I changed my major. Spanish just spoke to me. And I really wasn't sure I wanted to teach right away, but I did my student teaching so I could have my license in PA. And then I got an assistantship at Penn State, and I taught Spanish at the university level while I got my master's in Spanish linguistics. And then there was a job open near where my husband was going to be going to school. And I thought, well, I can do this. Well, my first year, I hated it. I didn't think I was cut out for high school teaching. I think I taught college, so I expected more of the students. But I had a supervisor who wasn't willing to let go of me. And he made my way so easy for me my second year by eliminating every student I ever had and getting me all new kids. And I proved myself that I could teach, and I proved it to myself as well. That's when I fell in love with it. So it wasn't a love at first sight kind of employment, but I love being able to speak another language.
I'm curious, has that helped you in your travels too?
Oh, absolutely. Just right here in Delaware, we have so many Spanish speakers now. So I was in the shop one morning and a lady came in. And it was clear she didn't speak any English. So I went over and I started talking with her, and her eyes was like, oh my gosh, someone speaks Spanish here. My boss was like, okay, that's it. You can't work part-time. You have to be here all the time. And I said, no, 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 that's not going to happen. I also am learning piano. And one of my piano teacher students, who is 40 almost, he's also a construction worker, which is how I got my sewing room. And he is a budding musician, and I translate his Spanish songs to English. So it's helped me along the way in many different ways.
Wow, that is so cool. So you grew up in Pennsylvania. Where are you now, and how did you get there?
I live in Georgetown, Delaware, which is about 25 minutes from the beach in Rehoboth. I got here by way of New York, 31 years in New York. I was in Orange County. We raised two sons. One is still in New York. One is in Atlanta, Georgia. My husband and I both were teachers. My husband held on way longer than I did, 37 years. He made it through COVID. I didn't. And we were looking to decide where to move. And New York is very expensive. The taxes are ridiculous. It just didn't seem to make sense to stay in a large house for just two people and a dog. So we moved to Delaware. My sister in law literally lives across the cornfield from me. And I will say, Delaware has been a very big adjustment for me. First of all, it's flat. Having moved from the Catskills of New York, it's flat. But I love being near the beach. We have several large quilt guilds here. It was a transition for me. I considered actually going back to the classroom and teaching Spanish, went for a few interviews, but my heart wasn't there. I miss the kids, but I don't miss all of the other stuff that you have to do. So I decided to put my energy into patterns and trying to do things that I wanted to do. So here I am in Delaware, and that's what I'm trying to do.
Are you going to consider teaching adults quilting?
I actually am already. I was very fortunate. There's a quilt store just across the bay in Annapolis, Maryland. I had been to her shop and she sent out an email and said, "Hey, if you're interested in teaching, if you know anyone, please let me know." My husband's like, "You could do this." So I took a couple of my patterns, a couple of things I had done, and other things that I had done on other people's patterns. And I went and had a meeting with Kathy. And she's like, "Let's try." So I have a couple of loyal followers over there. I don't go too much because it's about an hour and 40 minutes. And you have to cross what I call the nasty bridge. Not my favorite bridge. But I also teach locally at the shop where I am working. And I've given a few lectures, trunk show type lectures locally. That's where I decided to put my time.
Trisha, is there anything else about your family you wanted to share?
I'm married to a wonderful man who has supported me tremendously. Never questions, "Gee, I'm going on a retreat." Really? Where? When? How much? Never in a million years. So I'm very, very fortunate he's allowed me to be as independent in that regard. He also speaks Spanish, I should mention. He lived in Chile for 2 years in the Peace Corps. So that's something that we share, which helps as well. I also have two sons that followed me dutifully to every quilt store I ever went. I used to go to Lancaster, Pennsylvania, 3, 4, 5 times a year. They loved it when they were little because they played mini golf and ate and went to Hershey Park. And as they got older, they basically ate. And if I go there and I don't bring beef jerky, I'm in trouble. So I've been very fortunate. My mom lived with us for 12 years after my dad passed. She was always interested in what I was doing. And she was a great assistant at times because she unfortunately had macular degeneration and glaucoma. So she was rapidly losing her sight. But one of the things that went for her was color. So I could lay fabrics down and she could tell me what was the darkest or the lightest. So if I was struggling, I could lay them down and she'd shine a light on them and she could do that. So it was pretty cool. And I don't know whether you're going to ask me about my first quilt or not, but the first quilt I ever made was for my parents' 48th wedding anniversary. They had no idea I was quilting, never knew I started, and were just blown away. And afterwards, they were just so excited that I found something I love to do.
How neat to be able to share that with them.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this should be a fun question now that you have a granddaughter. But thinking about her future generations, if you could speak to your great, great, great grandchildren, with them looking back, what do you think they would know about you, or what would you want them to know about you?
I think they would see that I was a hard worker, that I didn't give up, that I kept going, and that I did many different things. I think if they were able to read my story and see, "Oh, well, she did this, and then she did this, and she liked this," and that she didn't stick to one thing, and that they would know that I didn't give up and that I kept going and pushing and learning. And hopefully they would do the same thing.
And what would you want to say to them?
I'd want them to know that it's okay to break the rules in what you're learning to do. When I started quilting, it was all about rules. And I had a couple of teachers that this was the box and you don't step out. And I think when I was younger, I was much more like that, even in my teaching style when I was in the high school, because you want to fit in with your colleagues. And I learned so many things that helped students learn that I was willing to step outside and do something completely different. Some of my colleagues were like, "Are you crazy?" But when the kids would respond and they would do well, breaking the rules was the most important thing. And that sometimes people are going to say no, and then you got to find a way around if you really truly want to do that. And I hope that, especially my granddaughter, because she's a girl, is able to see that. And she has a very strong mom, too, who is like that. So I think that she will see that. And her dad is very much like his dad. So hopefully it will continue.
Yeah. Now, besides quilting, are there other crafts that you do?
I have participated in a lot of swaps on Instagram. So it has stretched what I do in terms of crafting. I've always made Christmas ornaments. Since my kids were little, every year at Christmas time, I would pick something that they could make and we would make it together. And then when they got older, well, mom did it, but that was okay. So they've each got a collection of ornaments that they took with them from our house when we moved, with all the different ornaments. So I still do Christmas ornaments. At the shop, we did some make and takes in December. We made an angel that I saw years ago in a quilt maker, and I've adapted it. And then we also did the Danish stars, and people were loving coming in and doing those quick make and takes. So I've also stretched myself in terms of other crafts I've done. I'm not a knitter or a crocheter. I would love to be able to crochet. I just can't seem to get the rhythm of it. But I've done some yarn things. I've done smaller sewing projects. For the swaps, I've made aprons. I've done little dishes, bowls, Christmas stockings. I make Christmas stockings for all the kids in the family. I would love to try painting. Haven't gotten there yet. That'll be on my list somewhere along the line. And I love to collect shells, but I haven't figured out what to do with them yet. My husband always laughs. He says, "In your copious spare time, this is when you're going to do this, right?" I said, "Yeah, my next life."
It's funny. I don't think people should be able to say, I'm bored, because there are so many things we can do.
Yeah, always. My daughter-in-law made the table numbers for the wedding were all embroidered by her and her mom, and then they framed them. So when they were all done, they took them out of the frames and they were sitting in a pile. And I said, "Allison, what are you going to do with those?" And she's like, "I don't know, throw them in a drawer." And I was like, "Oh, no, 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 no." I said, "Can I have them? I'll do something." So I thought long and hard, and I ended up making them a perpetual calendar. I had no idea how I was going to do it. I didn't have a pattern, but I used magnetic snaps. I framed all the numbers and made a little background. I paper pieced the 3 letters for each month and sent it back to them. And she's like, "Oh my gosh, you couldn't throw all that time away. And this way you have a memory from the wedding, but you have memory from your mom."
What a cool idea.
There was a lot of grousing as I was making, I can't believe I said I was going to do this. I hate to paper piece, but it turned out okay.
Wow. A lot of work, but man, that must be beautiful.
It is pretty. It's very simple, but that's Allison and Kevin. They're very simple. They like it that way.
I'm sorry, but paper piecing in any form doesn't sound simple to me.
Ugh. These were just 3 letters. That's why the months weren't spelled all the way out. If I had to spell every month, they would never have gotten them back. And I probably spent less time paper piecing 3 letters than she did with her mom embroidering all of them.
And then, are there hobbies that you do?
Yes, I love to read and I am learning piano. I started piano when the kids were small, but then I stopped to give them lessons and went back in about 2017, 2018. I had major reconstruction on my knee. My husband bought me a keyboard, and then COVID hit. I was not an online lesson kind of girl, so I kind of played with what I could do. And when we moved to Delaware, I found the best teacher. She's just wonderful. And talk about small world. She graduated high school where I graduated high school. but she graduated with my sister. What are the odds? But she's been so encouraging, and I've just finished being able to play Fiorelise, the entire piece. It's not perfect. So that's what I'm doing right now. I spend most of my time quilting, but I try to spend an hour every day at the piano. We also ride bikes here because it's flat, which is really nice. And I love to walk the beach. I guess I could call that a hobby.
Oh, yeah.
I'd never be bored.
So do any of these hobbies or your other crafts show up in your quilting?
Yes, in fact, there is a quilt that used to be over where my keyboard was. I bought a new electric piano, so it's on the other side of the wall now. But when my son was learning piano, I designed a piano. I just started playing with blacks and grays. And I also learned a lot from making that quilt, that you don't waste time hand quilting in places where you're not going to see it, because I hand quilted it. But the one thing I did do is around the outside, it's a black border with a little bit of red. And I hand quilted with, and I broke the rules. I used a silver thread to hand quilt that, no, I don't think anyone would have hand quilted with it. And I hand quilted all the words from my son's music books, Adagio and Vivace, and all around the outside. Those you can see, but some of the others you can't. So that doubled into my quilting. In terms of the other things, reading has fallen into my quilting. I love Charles Dickens, and my favorite book in particular is A Christmas Carol. It has all the elements of the perfect novel, in my opinion, and it was a book that people thought at the time should never have been printed. A Christmas book, why would you do a Christmas book? And right after it was released, charitable giving skyrocketed. It was just one of those books that really impacted. So I made a quilt of Charles Dickens. I made very modern letters, and it says, God bless us, everyone. And then each block represents something from the novel. I am not a great drawer, but I played around until I got what I wanted. So that's my nod to Charles Dickens.
Oh, cool.
So that was fun. And I have an unusual sunbonnet Sue. It's actually using the Tula Pink De La Luna fabrics. So it's Sunbonnet Sue meets Day of the Dead. All of the girls have dresses from her De La Luna collection, and then the Catrina faces are in there because I taught Spanish Day of the Dead. I did it every year. So my other interests have definitely spread into my quilting.
Wow. Tell about who introduced you to quilting.
Probably my original would have been my grandmother, but at the time when you're 13, 14, it just didn't stick. But I always admired her quilts. I always had one. Everybody in the family got one. But Kevin was about 2, Stephen was 4, and I was in Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania, visiting my sister-in-law while my husband was at a conference nearby, and she's a quilter. So she's like, oh, you could learn how to do this. And I went, no, no, no. I said, my grandmother did that. I can't do that. She's like, yes, you can. And she sent me home with a stack of fabric and a bunch of books. And then I had a $50 Singer sewing machine that basically did a straight stitch. And I started playing, and I fell in love. That was it. All bets were off. I said, you know what? I have to learn how to do more of this. And so she's the one that created the monster. And she's also the one that lives across the cornfield.
So do you get to quilt together sometimes?
Yes, we do. And we've done projects together. My other sister-in-law unfortunately lost a daughter to an overdose. We took clothing that belonged to Pamela and we divided it and we picked a theme. And then she made half the blocks. I made half the blocks. We put them together. And then a very dear friend of mine in New York, Barbara Hanneberg, quilted it for us. And so it sits on one of the beds in Pennsylvania at her house now. So we have done a few things together.
Tell about your favorite quilt.
This was a hard one. I really had to think about this one, but I think my favorite quilt is a quilt that I made in honor of our greyhound who passed away in 2017. His name was Fonzie. Fonzie was a racer. His original name was Fonner. And when he got fostered, they named him Fonzie. So my kids called him the Fonz, and they didn't even watch Happy Days. Fonzie was a beautiful fawn-colored greyhound who we got when he was 5. He was a phenomenal racer, which is why he was older when we got him. Gentle, gentle giant. He loved people. He just was a wonderful, wonderful dog. And he lived to just about to his 12th birthday. After he passed away, I toyed with what to do. And we had another greyhound at the time, Bugsy, and I'm working on a Bugsy quilt too, because we lost her last May. But I had this thought, Fonzie every month of the year. So every month, Fonzie is doing something different. So I rough drew a greyhound, very whimsical. And I used buttons for eyes and felt for his nose. And I put batting into the ears and batting under his face. And then I left the ears floppy, or I turned one down, one up. Everyone is different. And then in October, Fonzie's actually upside down looking into a pumpkin. I drew a graduation cap for June, and he's got a tassel. So he's graduating and he has a little diploma. Christmas, he's got a red nose and antlers. July 4th, he's all done up for red, white, and blue. September, there's a little blackboard that says ABC 123 on it. My husband adores this quilt, and it hangs on a wall in our house. And I actually had his name printed and put underneath it. I've never intended to enter him anywhere. My sister-in-law was like, "Oh, you need to enter him into the show." And I happened to be there the day they were judging. So I was trying to step back. I didn't win an award. Compared to the other applique in that applique group, mine was whimsical. It didn't match. And that happens sometimes. But listening to the judge, she was saying, "What a wonderful, whimsical quilt. What a wonderful memory." So I was really pleased. And my girlfriend, Barbara, quilted it. So it's got lovely, lovely quilting. And on the back, the backing fabric are dogs that look like they're taking selfies. And there's actually a greyhound in the mix. So, yeah, Fonzie's probably the favorite. But I probably could tell you 5 others that I would say the same thing.
Yeah, putting so much time into them and just spending that time with the quilts.
Mm-hmm.
We all probably have a lot of favorites.
Yep. I have another one that has a dachshund on it. We had dachshunds before we had greyhounds. And that quilt was very special. I hand quilted it. I was working on that quilt when my mom passed away. And at first, I didn't think I'd be able to finish it, but I did. It provided a very cathartic response for me to be able to finish that one. And that has Alexandra on it. So, yeah,
Yeah,
they all have a meaning.
they sure do. So, in the quilting process, do you like each step along the way, or is there a particular step that you look forward to?
I pretty much like it all. I do love picking the fabrics, though. I love it when you find just the right fabric to mix. Some of the things that I've been doing now, I've been doing these little villages. And so I look at fabric differently for those than I would for a large quilt. And when I find something that represents, I just found little thread spools that are real tiny that I can fussy cut and put on the roof of the building and say that it's the sewing store. That makes me really excited. And finding the little doodads. Not particularly fond of the quilting, which is why I quilt by check, unless it's a small piece. So that would probably be the one I look forward to the least. I've tried free motion. It just doesn't work for me. But I have taken walking foot classes with Jackie Gehring, and I've learned a lot from her. So that helps.
That must have been exciting to get to go to one of her classes.
It was a Zoom class during COVID. She was also a middle school teacher, I think. So she knew exactly how much to give you to do and then come back. We've all taken quilt classes with it, people that go, "Oh, I wish they'd give me more time to do this or a little less time here." She just seemed to have it all together and the class flowed. And I think that's why I learned so much.
Interesting. Share your worst quilting experience.
It was a quilt I saw in a quilt shop in that's no longer around. It was in Somers, New York. And I used to love the shop, literally next door to my orthopedic surgeon's office. So anytime I went, I got to visit. And on the wall was this beautiful wall hanging. It was a 6-pointed star. It was the Star of David. It was done in purples and blues. There were periwinkles. And then a beautiful applique dove on top, kind of coming across and up with an olive branch in its mouth. They had put a floral background on the edges. I just thought it was beautiful. And I'd never done that kind of star before. I thought, let me try. I had such a horrible time I think part of it was I was just above my pay grade. And I thought, I can do this. It's the only time that I have actually thrown fabric away in process. The only time. And I just couldn't get it to fit right. And I guess the class needed to be longer for me, maybe. I don't know. But I couldn't do it. And I just got frustrated. And I said, you know what? This isn't worth it. And I balled it up and threw it away. That was probably 20 years ago. Probably it was be more because it was before I went back to the classroom. So it was probably about 1999.
Wow. Do you wish sometimes you had put it aside to come back to, or you're just glad it's out of the house?
Now I wish I had come back to it because I realized it's like a piece of music for me. When I first started playing piano, I really wanted to play Fur Elise. And my new piano teacher let me suffer through that piece because she knew it was what I wanted. When I came back to it 6 months ago, I looked at it completely differently because now I'd learned the chords and I'd learned how the progressions went and I could see things that I couldn't see the first time. And I'm sure it would have been the same thing with that quote,
Yeah.
but I got frustrated.
Since we could do a lot of things with our time, why do you think you keep coming back to quilting rather than doing anything else?
I find that I can forget everything in the outside world when I'm in my sewing room. Right now, I'm working on an auction piece for the MD Anderson Cancer Center. I did one last year and I'm working on a village. And my husband will come in and say, do you realize you've been standing there for 2 hours working on shifting pieces and cutting things out and laying them in? I don't even realize. And there's a clock in my sewing room, but I just never look at it. I listen to books and you get lost in it. I think also that when you're working on a piece for someone else, it does give you a sense of satisfaction that you're able to do something for someone else. And I think that in the quilting world, there are so many ways to give of your time in your quilting. It makes your heart sing because it's just such a wonderful, wonderful opportunity to use what you love, but to give to someone else too, especially family members, when they see something or you make something special. And it's just so much fun. And then to be perfectly selfish about it, it's wonderful when you see something and you go, I was able to do that. I never thought I'd be able to do that. I took a class with Karen Eckmeyer on her Happy Villages. I don't know if you're familiar with those or not. It's a footsie little thing, but the first time I did it, it was like, oh, can't do this. And when I took the class with her, she came over, she goes, stop spending so much time thinking about it. Just put the pieces, build, construct. You can fix it later. And it was so much fun to finally get to the point now where I can do that and not feel frustrated. So I think there is definitely a self-serving piece to it.
It sounds like she gave you a bit of freedom.
Yes, she does. She really does. I love her. I had met her years ago and I could never get into her classes. And then when she was in Gettysburg last year, I immediately signed up for it and I got right in. I've taken another thing with her too. So she's wonderful. Yeah, she definitely is. And I think that's what new quilters will discover, that you have freedom, but you have to let yourself have that freedom
Mm-hmm.
and be willing to say, okay, I screwed it up, but I can change it.
Yeah.
What applique was for. It hides a multitude of sin.
Who do you usually make your quilts for?
I do a lot of quilting for family. I also do some pieces for charity. When my husband's colleague passed away of cancer, they wanted to start a scholarship fund for her, and her last name is Gold. So I did a pattern that was a play on log cabin. It looked like hearts. And I did it in harvest browns and golds, and we called it Hearts of Gold. And they raised about $1,100, which was wonderful. And then the person that won it knew her husband and gave it back to the family, which was really, really cool. As I mentioned, I'm working on a piece for the MD Anderson Cancer Center. On Instagram and Facebook, there are so many opportunities. Someone will say, I need this, or I need this, or would you like to make for this? And it's just so much fun to be able to do that and to stretch, to be challenged by what their parameters are to do that. Our local guild here, it's not small. It's the biggest guild in Delaware. They have 240 members, and they have 8 different committees for charity quilts. So you can make pillowcases, you can do lioness quilts. We take wedding gowns and turn them into newborn funeral clothes. We do breast cancer pillows, teddy bears we're very close to Dover Air Force Base. So when parents unfortunately pass away in the military, we'll send teddy bears up there, and they give teddy bears out with usually patriotic fabrics. So there's quite an opportunity here to spread your talents around and feel like, you can make a little bit of a difference.
That's great. What are you working on right now?
Right now, I'm working on the piece for the MD Anderson Cancer Center. It's a village, and the parameters were you had to use only cherry wood dyed fabrics. So it was a real challenge for me because I'm used to being able to, if I want to use rock wall, I can find rock wall fabric, but I can't do that with this piece. So I've had to create a village only using that. So that's been a lot of fun, but I can embellish. I can use buttons and things like that. And I'm also working on a shop sample. We're getting ready for the all Mid-Atlantic shop hop, Delaware, Pennsylvania, Virginia, West Virginia, Maryland, and New Jersey. And I just did the shop quilt. So I'm waiting for that to get back from the quilter so I can put the binding on it. And then I'm also working on binding. I thought I would be taking care of Ella for the whole month of June. So I was putting binding on quilts, but not sewing it down, thinking I could take it with me. And in the evenings I could sew. And then I didn't have to be there for more than 5 days. So now I've got a stack of quilts that need to have binding sewn down. So I guess that's next on my list.
Well, it's great to be prepared, but
Now I'm buried in binding. I think I'm going to have to farm some of it out.
please share a quilting tip.
My biggest quilting tip, and I know I mentioned it earlier, is break the rules. Because if you break the rules, sometimes you're going to discover a new world in quilting, a new technique, something that you never thought you'd be able to do if you break the rules. And for me, I don't applique the way everybody else appliques. I've done collage quilts, but I don't do them the method that there's a very famous quilter out there that does it. I didn't know about her when I made mine. So I broke the rules and just went, I think I can do that. And I think that if you do that as a quilter, you'll learn a lot more.
Interesting. And that dachshund is really cute.
Thank you. That was interesting. My mother-in-law was a budding artist. That was one of her outlets. And she wasn't always great, but she was good at pencil drawing, I will say. And she had drawn our dachshunds. We had 2 at the time. And then she passed away before she finished it. But I found her pencil drawing. And since I can't draw a dog, except Fonzie and the Whimsy, I blew it up and put it out onto a piece of muslin. And then I just started cutting flowers and just playing his ear flaps and his tail flaps. And I thought, this can't be hard. Although sometimes it turns out to be a lot harder than you thought.
Oh, yeah. Describe how you went from having quilting as your hobby and you decided it would become a business.
Well, I use the word business loosely because, as I said, I'm not looking to be the next big quilter in America. I needed an outlet after I gave up teaching. Like I said, for the first year, I considered going back to the classroom because I don't know what else to do. And then I thought, well, I had made the dog, I had made a few other things. I thought maybe somebody else would want to make the things that I've made. So I sat down and started learning how to write patterns. Some very dear friends, some across the pond, some in the middle of the country, have tested my patterns for me. They're not highly technologically designed in terms of I don't use EQ8. I'm an old school graph paper and pencil kind of girl. I use photographs for my patterns, but I offered the class with the sunflowers that I had done. It was one fabric that was an ombre fabric, went dark to light, back to dark again, and I used it to make a rail fence background, and it looked like you had done something else. Used a Dresden plate, made some sunflowers. Plus, I basically just hand cut some leaves. And it was a class that people loved. The lady in Annapolis actually just called me and said, I need more of those patterns. You need to send me some. People are asking for it. So I thought, maybe I can keep doing this. So then I didn't want to do a selling kind of website, but I wanted to share. And I do share some of the things that I do for free. I'm still trying to get myself into a rhythm with my website to really stay on top of it. So that's kind of how it evolved. I want to have fun. And I think that sometimes people that start a business, I've heard this from people. I at one time wanted to have a quilt store. I thought it would be really fun to have a quilt store. And I was talking to a woman who had just closed hers, and she said, no, you don't. She said, this is the first time I've taken up needle and thread in 3 years. But working in a quilt store is the next best thing because I get to share vicariously in people's lives. You get to help people. I can have all the fabric I want. It's at my fingertips. So I get the best of both.
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it. But you did name your business. What is that name and how did you come up with it?
Dulce Quilts is my website because I taught Spanish. My favorite book, other than a Dickens book, was Don Quixote de la Mancha. And there's some just wonderful quotes in that book. And one that I used to hang in my classroom for the kids to read. And I had translated for them that basically it's saying, show me your friends and I'll show you your future. Tell me where you're going and I'll tell you who you'll be. And I just love the book. And one of the main characters is named Dulcinea. And it basically means sweetness. So quilting is sweet. So it became Dulce Quilts, sweet quilts.
Oh, cool. It's so much fun to get these backgrounds of things. You think they're simple, but there's so much more meaning there. When you started teaching quilting, do you remember how was it to walk in and greet these new quilting students? What was that like?
It was very nerve-wracking. I mean, I had been in front of a classroom for 25 years. I never got nervous walking into a room. It was always, don't let them see you sweat because they'll find your weakness. So I never had an issue. And the first quilting class I taught was a wallet that I had made of the pattern maker. Her name is Jessica Vandenberg. She's in New York. Her website is So Many Creations. Lovely girl. Knew her before she became the quilter that she is now, when she was just starting out. So I knew her back when. And the person who owns the shop where I work, Nancy's like, you can do this. You can do this. And I went, oh, I'm so nervous. And I had like 15 people sign up to do this wallet. And one of the people that was in it, his name was Skip Claiborne. Skip unfortunately passed away last year, too young in age. One of the most encouraging people I've ever met. He didn't know me very well from Guild, but he said to me, he goes, I've already decided you're a success. So just go there and do it. That meant so much to me when I walked through that door. But I think because I taught for 25 years, something I used to tell my students, and I tell my quilting students this every time now, is that just because I'm the one standing up here doesn't mean that I have all the information or all the knowledge. This room is filled with knowledge. Even if you're a new quilter, you still have some background and we can all learn from each other. And I think going into it with that attitude helped because people didn't look at me as hopefully, if she makes a mistake. And that's being the type A plus personality that I am. It's always like, oh no, I don't want to make a mistake. But yeah, and what Skip said to me just changed everything.
Mm-hmm. We probably touched on this already, but did teaching Spanish carry over to your teaching quilting?
It did. And I think that anytime you have teaching experience in another field, it will carry into the teaching field that you're going to. What I mean by that is I knew how to plan a lesson. I knew what my goal was. I knew what supplies we needed. I knew how to address the class with that information so that they could come feeling successful, that they were prepared. I knew where I wanted to be at the end of the class. Now, that doesn't mean I always got there because it wasn't a Spanish lesson. Now it was a quilting lesson. And while you might be the head of the class and you're just able to get to the end really fast, somebody over here is still struggling to do this. So I had to learn how to pace and to allow people to go ahead. Then they are able to help others because they have more experience. So I think that being a teacher ahead of time definitely gave me a leg up.
You started to create patterns and you decided to create free patterns that you offer on your website. What was your thinking as you did that?
The one with the spool of thread, I guess I saw a poster somewhere and I just thought it was really fun because it was really simple to piece. It wasn't rocket science. And most quilters have some sort of florals in their stash somewhere. And I thought this could just be a quick little something that you could put together and throw together as a gift. Because I'm not looking to make this a giant business, I decided to use my website as a chance to give patterns to people that just might have fun using them. The music pattern that's on there is the one that I made for my son. I thought maybe somebody else had kids that did the piano and they wanted to do that. The heart table runner, I had made another quilt that actually had stacked hearts. I was playing with the math to try to do it pieced instead of applique. So that was a challenge for me. So I thought maybe somebody else might be interested in trying to do hearts the way I did them. The eagle quilt, there's a lot of eagle fans out there and they're all as crazy as I am, and probably some more so. And I thought it might be fun. I've shown that quilt at a couple of shows and people were like, oh my gosh, is there a pattern? I need to make that for my son. I need to make that for my daughter. And I haven't gotten that pattern up yet, but I will. That quilt was donated to Mud in My Cleats. We have a quilter here in Delaware who was a New England Patriot at one time. Years ago, he's older. Joe is the sweetest guy. And he happened to see me when I was holding that quilt up. And that was the year the Eagles beat the Patriots. So that's how I got to meet him. And he plays golf with my husband. I was just this lovely man. And he works with other NFL players to raise money for veterans. I didn't know this, but in the NFL, if you don't play so many games in 3 seasons, you get no benefits. You walk away with nothing. So there are a lot of players that have nothing. They have no pensions. They have nothing. So they raise money. So I donated that quilt, which my husband was glad to see it leave the wall, I think. So I think that's pretty much why I did it, to try to just share. I don't want to sound like Albert Schweitzer, but I just have so much fun learning from other people and seeing what other people are doing. I'm not sure I even had a reasoning behind it, now that I think about it.
Is there anything else about your business that you would like to share?
Like I said, I'm not looking to expand it. I'm looking to just continue to have fun. And I would encourage those that are thinking about writing a pattern or thinking about teaching a class to take a stab at it. Give it a shot. Websites aren't hard to do. Classes aren't hard to teach, especially your people around you. Start in your own guild. And I would encourage people to do that.
Great. And where can we go to find you?
www.dulcequilts.com. That is my website.
Go ahead and spell Dulce so people can hear that.
It's D as in David, U, L as in Larry, C, E, quilts.com.
Great.
If you like Haagen-Dazs Dulce de Leche ice cream, there's Dulce.
Great. Well, Trisha, thank you so much for joining us on A Quilter's Life. I loved hearing your story, and thank you for sharing with us.
Thank you so much for inviting me, and I look forward to hearing more from all the quilters on your podcast.
Great. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
You can find more stories on aquilterslife.com or subscribe on your favorite podcast player so each episode will be downloaded automatically. Also, I want to hear about you and your wonderful quilts. Please contact me, Paula Chamberlain, through the website to set up an interview. And as always, thanks for listening.